Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve podcast. Today's guest is a podcaster and all-round interesting guy, all the way from Florida. His name is PJ Wehry. Welcome to the show, PJ. How you doing?
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on, Christian.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Most people don't know this, actually, so I'm just going to quickly say this. So whenever I do the podcast, I do a little bit of a pre-talking thing beforehand, which normally is just like, hey, is this appropriate? Are you happy with this? Is it, well, you know what it is, but for those who don't know, it's more like, do you have any questions? Is there anything off limits? That's basically what I do, and it's a good, sometimes people do, sometimes, but straight away, we just started having a good conversation and I was like, maybe I should stick this recording button on. Let's get this show rolling.
For sure.
But I just want to highlight a little bit. So yeah, obviously you're a podcaster, but let's talk a little bit about some of the stuff you were sort of mentioning off camera there. Obviously I won't get you to repeat anything, but
yeah, no worries.
You said that you'd done like 20 episodes of the podcast.
Yeah.
So what have been kind of like the biggest challenges so far? The biggest things you've learned from it, and just like, I don't know, all around lessons learned in that area. What's been the journey so far?
I'd already built my own business, which we're currently still running, so that makes life exciting. I'm a digital marketer, run a agency with my wife, and whenever you start something new and big like a podcast or a business or any of that, there's going to be work, but you always forget what like the early work is where you have no success, just like what a slog it is. You're like, my poor wife, I'm like looking at my phone and just checking analytics for like it's going to change in an hour or two how many views I have on YouTube. And it's bad. It's obsessive and it's bad.
I got to cut in that. I don't normally interrupt my guests as soon as I ask a question, but you're literally describing my life right now. I'm just sitting there. It's like, this is weird. I swear the universe is, part of my language, like just fucking with me right now. Because literally, I had a live stream the other day where maybe my attitude was a bit off, but I was like, damn it, I've been working like really hard for like 2 years and it's not going anywhere. And, I've done like over 100 episodes of this podcast and a bunch of other stuff. And, and I've had some successes, but it's not going anywhere. And it's like, dude, you're speaking to me right now. You're so right. It is in the beginning and just in general, it's such a slog. Nothing is guaranteed. You don't know that it's going to happen straight away. And like I said, I've been doing the podcast a year, and it's only really now that it's beginning to pick up what I would term as like a very, very small audience, which is better than nothing, right?
Yeah. Oh no.
But like at the same time, it's like I feel like there should be more growth. I've seen other people succeed way quicker with a lot less, and I'm like okay, I won't name any names, but there's this podcast that I know it sounds like I'm look, it's just because
it's all right. No, it's all right. It's like, not to name any names, but no, I got you.
They'll probably know that I'm talking about them, and I really respect them. So if they do know that I'm talking about them, I do really respect them. You smashed it. But it's like they do like 20-30 minute episodes, and they smash it. They get like hundreds of views, thousands of views. I do like in-depth podcasts, hour, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours. I do clips. I do all the marketing stuff that you're supposed to do.
Yes.
And just nothing.
Yeah.
Just nothing. And and that's the thing. People that do listen to it enjoy it. And like they say, oh, it's good. There's this, there's that. And I'm like, well, if it's so good.
Yeah.
Bloody problem then.
Yeah.
It's not working. Anyway, enough about me. Let's get back to you, man.
Well, I know, I love that. Let me tag on to there because I did a couple things. Obviously I looked up how to do podcasts well. If you're getting into it for the money, you're getting into it for the wrong reasons. That's what everybody says. And then everybody gets into it for the money. Okay, let's be almost everybody. Almost everyone's like, I mean, if Joe Rogan made 100 million, I'd take 1 million. That's fine. That's fine. But
I'll take $1 million. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. But the So for me, I do two podcasts. I do one that's called Weary Dads, and I do one that's called Chasing Leviathan. So my last name's Weary, play on, I mean, this is a great example. You know, we were just talking about how we're a little off this morning. I woke up at 3:30, thinking about business stuff, and then my kids came in at 5, and like, I'm a weary dad. I am a tired dad. Like, but for me, and I'll just give you the two reasons I created the two different podcasts. Because I think what I want to do is, no matter if I have to decide to pull the plug on this, and I've created a business plan where I will not do that until I'm at least 2 years in, because most businesses will not turn a profit in the first 3 years.
Sure.
So, I mean, if I'm 2 years in and I'm still at 20 listeners, it's like, something's wrong, right? Like, maybe I've made a mistake, right? But if I mean, you're at like 790 subscribers on YouTube. You're like, you're. But anyways, I don't need to. I'm not trying to get into that. I've seen that you're obviously growing. You're obviously going places, and you're starting to see that.
You say
that's
that.
A year in.
You say that, right? And it's funny because I said the same thing to my last guest who had a similar conversation about this. Like,
yeah, if
anything, because I'm a big marketing guy. We'll talk analytics. We'll talk all about that stuff in a bit later. But like, I painstaking. I don't look at this stuff as much as I used to, but I do look at it, and I see that number going up and down, mostly going down. Right.
Yeah.
And then you try to look, because obviously marketing is all about the trends and the patterns and stuff, right? So you're saying like, okay, well, what's the pattern here? And
that's big. Yeah.
That's the thing. The only discernible pattern I can see is that there's this small core audience that watches. Love you. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. And then there's just like these anomaly episodes. So like, to give you an example, right? If you're watching the podcast on YouTube, the last 5 episodes, it would be like, let's say 30 views.
Yeah.
20, which is kind of like my average if I'm lucky. Yep. And then 70.
Yes.
And then back down to like 18. And then 12. And then there's episodes that you think, oh, surely this will do well. Like, for instance, I had a guest recently, right? Where she'd done TED Talks. She'd been featured in Forbes. Sounds great on paper, right?
Yeah.
Right, it's the same as like when people say, "Oh, who's the biggest person you've had on your podcast? Who's the most famous person?" I guarantee, if I could have a massive, celebrity on my podcast tomorrow, and I doubt that it would make much difference, even having had my stuff shared there.
Yeah,
it's about if people like you and want to stick around you. Yeah, sure, a bunch of people might watch that clip or that episode of you interviewing that person, but they don't care about you. They care about your guest, and like, they don't stick around for you. And that's the thing. Like, I was thinking about this the other day when I was having a bit of a rant on live stream, but I didn't actually say it in these words, so I'll say it here. It is so difficult to get people to care about you, to care about what you have to say. I mean, it's like, because who are you? Like, I get that sometimes. I do these like Ask Me Anything live streams, right? Online. And sometimes people like sarcastically put like, well, who are you? And, sometimes they're being genuine. They're like, well, who are you? What do you do? And it's like, you say those things and it sounds great, but it's like, unless you're someone noteworthy and you have the machine behind you.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't matter how hard you work. I've had people say loads of nice things about me, and that's great. And I'm very thankful and grateful to hear that. But it doesn't equate to like success,
Right. Yeah.
Oh man.
No, it's true. I mean, when you talk about success rate in podcasting, and this is different from digital marketing, like digital marketing, you can be in the bottom 40% and make money. Like there's always more, like that's part of the reason I went into that. I went in that direction is there's just money in digital marketing, right?
Yeah.
I would say, from what I understand, we're probably in the top 5%. But that's like that. If you're podcasting, you got to be top 1% really to like be successful. So, I mean, even it's a tough business. And if you're going to be in the top 1%, that's not just going to be talent. It's not just going to be polish. It's also going to be grind. And so eventually you're going to like, You're sometimes you're not going to catch on, and that could be a whole bunch of number of things. Sometimes it's just getting lucky. Sometimes it's that one clip going viral. There's all sorts of different things that can mean for that. Which for me, like, I think there is an element of luck in the podcasting side of things. I think you can make a lot of your own luck, right? Like, so I don't want to like hard work is definitely a part of it, right? If you're skipping episodes, if you're skipping weeks and stuff like that, it's just not going to go anywhere. People really desire that consistency. Which when I look at yours, I'm like, I do one a week, and I see yours, and you're like 2 a week. I'm like, holy crap,
No,
this man's a machine.
That's the thing. I only do one a week. I did 2 a week this week. So what happened?
Oh, okay. I saw it. I was like, my goodness.
Actually, no, I'll share this. So this is a good point that you're making. Yeah. I've realized both with podcasting and content creating, less is more. Less is always more. It keeps people wanting more. Like, there's no point going like, oh, I did 5 podcasts this week, because I know that there's people that done that. There's this guy whose podcast I was on. Shout out to Saab Powers, and he'd already got up to like 100 episodes, 150 in the space of like a month or two. That's amazing. Ooh. But he's like recording them every single day, and it's like crazy grind. But at the same time, I feel like trying to grow your audience with that, it's just too much. It's an overload. And don't get me wrong, I'm guilty of it. When I first started the podcast, I was just pumping, grinding, trying to get the numbers. Because truthfully, what happened was, in the beginning, I was struggling to find guests. And then, I discovered all these resources on Reddit. Great. Right. But then I got like a lot of people contact me. And I kind of just thought, well, I got the time. Fuck it, let's do it.
Yeah.
And so then my numbers increased, like, the amount of episodes, and then it kind of got back to like a bit more normal, like, and then I decided, okay, let's do it 1 a week. But I'm about to enter a new crazy period, and I've got this idea where I'm gonna, maybe if I have enough episodes, do like a 20 days, 15 days of Christmas deal where it's like one every day.
Oh, cool.
I don't know. I'm still theorizing in my head, but it kind of makes sense. But to get huge. To get to the point, though, I think that you're right. I think that it's better to, consistency is the most important thing, and not doing too many. And I know it's a tough one, like, especially now I've got over 100 episodes now. I feel like it's even more important now, because it's like the numbers are there. There's no need to really worry about, I don't have enough episodes or whatever. Like, there's people in my audience now who listen to the podcast who are unaware of some of the old episodes I did. Yeah. And it's like, that's even more reason to kind of try to spread this out. Plus, also, tip for podcasters out there, anyone listening that wants to become a podcaster or is struggling, you do yourself a lot of favors by scheduling ahead.
Oh yeah. Oh, very much so.
Yeah, and like, if you record it, who says you have to release it straight away? Maybe you release it months from now. It depends how time specific it is, I suppose. But
I try to keep it about 2 to 4 weeks, because I remember we did some episodes early for Chasing Leviathan and Weary Dads, and it was during the American election cycle. And so we're like, well, we don't know who's going to win. We weren't really getting into it. It's like, we're in times of uncertainty because we don't know who's going to win. And then I'm like releasing it months later, and I'm like, well, it's just something to put out for my first couple episodes. Like, okay. My only family's going to listen to this anyway. It's like the first 1 or 2. But I think it's really important for me, because you're talking about 1 in 100. And when I say 1 in 100, let's also remember that 50% of podcasters stop after 7 episodes. Like,
what is it about that number?
Oh, they don't know how hard it is.
But it's so odd. Like, I had a podcast before this. Yeah. So it's finished on number 7. So many people get to 7. There's a guy that I won't mention his name, but who started a podcast recently that I know who, and I guess he's just too busy, but same thing. It's like, this number 7 is like, if you don't get past 7, why is it number 7? What the hell is
I don't know. That's just the stat. Those are the stats I saw.
Weird.
Yeah. So for me, I want to go 2 years. And I think by creating consistency, you create enough data that's consistent, which is important. You can't just like, if you're all over the place, you can't discern trends, which is, I love that you brought that up. So you have to be willing to start experimenting after you see the trends. And so, and you have to give yourself time to establish trends and then experiment, establish trends again. That's why I think you don't know what you're really doing until you're 2 or 3 years in. Like, my goal is to go 3 years. If I'm 2 years in and I have absolutely nothing, then I'll reconsider. But you just don't know. So, but the other thing is, I don't want this to be a waste. So I created 2 podcasts that were valuable in and of themselves to me. So even if nothing happens with them, kind of a little bit of background about me. My goal was to be a philosophy teacher, I went and got a master's in philosophy, which basically makes you unemployable except as a philosophy teacher, right? And I developed some digestive issues around the age of 24, but the only way it showed up is that I was just very tired.
Okay.
It's related to dairy, but it's not dairy. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly it is. But I figured out by trying some dietary stuff, like all of a sudden for like 8 or 10 years, I had almost not 10 years, like 6 to 8 years, I had almost no energy. And then I switched. I just tried some drastic things. I went vegan for a little bit, and I figured out that like certain types of dairy just make me have to sleep. I will literally sleep 2 or 3 if I eat a lot of that kind of like soft cheeses and pasteurized milk, that kind of stuff. I will sleep 2 to 3 hours more and still be more tired than if I'd not slept those 2 or 3 hours. And so I thought I was suffering from depression, and I kind of was, but that was because I was just sick all the time. But it wasn't what you'd normally think of. And so I was supposed to be reading 3,000 pages directly in Heidegger, writing a 30-page paper on it, and applying to PhD programs while my wife had, and this all, so that's when this started, while my wife had just gotten pregnant with our first kid.
Oh,
and
damn.
I just collapsed. I just could not. So I went and started teaching in schools, found out that teaching high school is not for me. It was not a good fit. And so it's always been my dream to kind of continue. And I don't really care about teaching in academics as so much as I love teaching. Okay. And so for me, there's a good PhD and philosophy program near me in Tampa. And so I want to go there. And but I don't want, and I don't know what your academic experience is, but I think a lot of times people go into a program and they just learn enough to get by. And I'd rather it be an enriching and like already have a firm foundation going into it. So for me, Chasing Leviathan is I'm sharpening my conversational skills and I'm just learning. So I know one of my biggest problems, and I know this is a shocker, especially is like, one thing about podcasters is they like to talk. That's like,
really?
Like really, I know it's like I wanted to focus on the habit and discipline of listening. And so just Chasing Leviathan is about me just learning from other people in depth. And so for me, it's kind of like a free education. So if worse comes to worse, I've learned a lot. It'll be helpful when I go and pursue that PhD, probably when my kids are a little older and not waking me up at 4 a.m. They're 6 and 4. So they're like in the pooping and farting is really hilarious stage. So there's nothing like 5:30 in the morning, your son just like farting in the bed and just uncontrollably laughing, and you're trying to like teach him like good manners, but also it's like you're really tired and it is kind of funny. So like so I'm just like this, I'm like, okay, in a little bit. So for me, whatever happens to Chasing Leviathan, that's good. But I'm even more excited about Weary Dads from a personal level because I do it with my dad. So I live in a multi-generational house with my parents, and because my dad, his whole life has been a ministry and like just mentoring young men. That's what he's done his whole life. And so I was like, I want you near my kids, right? Like, I'm like, I know you'll do a good job. Like, he was a good dad to me. And I realized if we go 2 years and we shut this thing down, I'll have 2 years of content of my dad and I talking about manhood and mentoring and spiritual maturity, or just maturity in general. I don't like saying maturity because it's kind of like, oh, you're teaching him not to like, laugh at pooping and farting, but really like maturity in sense of like what it means to become like a full human, if that makes sense. and I'll have 2 years of that content that I can give to my kids, to my grandkids, to my great grandkids. And I'm like,
wow.
that's actually that's an amazing thing. That's worth whatever I'm putting into it. And so would I like to make this into like something I can make money at? Yeah, I'd much rather do this than staying up till 3 a.m. trying to figure out why Google DNS is not working on a website. It's like, people are like, oh, you must like coding. I'm like, I like coding. Like, it's more fun than digging ditches. But I'm not like, it always involves crazy deadlines. Like, something always breaks, and then you have to. I'm just like, I'm not here for it. No, I don't care what I'm being paid at 3 a.m. I just like, maybe it's not. Maybe this isn't worth it. But I've been able to build something really beautiful with my business and with my wife. So I don't want to downplay that. I'd much rather do that than as a small business owner, I always have new challenges every day. I can't imagine doing 40 hours a week in a cubicle. It would drive me crazy. I'm a very distractible person. I'm always obsessed with something new and learning something new. And that definitely plays itself more into podcasting than it does into like a corporate job. So
Yeah, no, I totally get where you're coming from. It seems like we have very similar philosophies on this stuff. I got to say, like, I mean, I will say that I really admire your reasoning for doing the podcast. I've only come across, I think, a handful of people that have a similar kind of mindset as far as, this is for me, this isn't to make money. I'm not going to lie to you guys. Like, I'm trying to get somewhere with this. But at the same time, I think it is good to be reminded of why you start doing things in the first place. And to be honest, the reason I started the podcast was because I just always wanted to do a podcast.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I wanted to. Well, no, seriously, I don't know.
Yeah. I got you. Yeah.
Originally, I wanted to, and I still kind of do want to do a podcast on wrestling. I love professional wrestling. And here's the thing: I about 5 years ago, when I was at uni, I flirted with the idea, tested with some really rudimentary equipment, and then nothing ever came of it.
Sure.
And then when I started doing this content creating stuff, some guys that I'm friends with considered, doing a podcast together. And I was like, yeah, I'm game. Like, yeah, let's do it. And we did it for 7 episodes. I didn't quit. The other two guys quit, and they're doing really well. Props to them. It was the right move for them. But for me, I was sat there thinking, well, I didn't want it to end. I was like a broken-hearted lover. I was like, I'm not ready for this. And I was like, well, what do I do? And I was like, I could spend ages trying to like search for a co-host or something, or I could just do this podcast that I'd always thought about doing that I'd never pulled the plug on. So I just did it. I didn't think about it. I just did it. And, a year later, here we are. And it's a bit kind of crazy. As you said before, the journey shapes what it eventually becomes. Like, I think when I started this, the format's never really changed, but my approach has.
Yeah.
Like now, and we were saying this off air about different types of guests that you have and stuff, and I won't make you repeat it because I know you don't want to crucify some of the guests that you had on here, but at the same time, it's like I'm trying to do something where it's more conversational. Like I love, I have show notes here, I plenty of questions and stuff. I do want to interview my guests, but I don't want it to be like, really serious, like it's like I want it to be more conversational. I think that's much easier to listen to. It's much more engaging. I've had guests on my show where it's very clear that they just wanted to push their product, and that's fine. Don't get me wrong. I realized that the whole setup is, you come on my show, you promote your thing, and whatever. But look, at the end of the day, I'm producing a product that needs to be entertaining. So it's not entertaining.
Not a commercial.
If the whole thing is an hour of advert, like who's going to listen to that, And like I remember I had a guest once who was promoting their product. I asked them a question about, as a generic question, what would they sort of suggest in a given area? Like what would be the first things they would do, in order what would they suggest to people, basically?
Yes.
And without skipping a beat, the first thing they suggested was their website, their products.
Me.
yeah, no, literally. And I was sitting there, and I was just keeping it together. I was like, okay, well, that was a point that I might as well just focus on asking the next question. And I was just really disappointed. I felt like saying, really? Really? That's the first thing you're going to say? That's the first thing people should do is look at your website. Like,
Yeah.
But at the same time, here's the thing. At the same time, from a marketing perspective, I can't fault it. You know, it's business, it's marketing. It's. Of course, you're going to say that. You know, you're not going to be like. I mean,
I'm gonna disagree with you, and this is something like I've built a thriving, and so I'm not selling my company services because I don't. we're booked 6 months out. So
oh wow,
I don't need any more. Like we're like, please stop. Like I mean, literally, we're like, hey, it's gonna be March. Like, or I suggest you go find someone else. Like, no, we'll wait. We like your work. I'm like, go somewhere else. Like you can't say it to a client. Like all right, March it is.
Hey, that's cool. They're willing to wait and take their money. Like, great, awesome.
But and the reason that we did this early, and I actually just. I actually have a neighbor who runs a charter plane service.
Oh, cool.
And which is kind of funny to find in the suburbs. I'm like, that you're here? I thought you'd be like, like on a lake somewhere, like. But the starting out early, and I think valuing relationships, and I even hate the term social capital because it still gives the idea of transaction. I hate that. It's not about transactions. It's about creating trust. And that's like, my reputation is more important to me than the money. And when we went into debt $50K to start the business. So that was exciting. So we were we weren't paying the bills. I'm talking to my wife and she's like, are we going to make it? I'm like, we're going to make it. Which, that takes
when you
nerves.
Said we're going to make it, were you just saying that like, yeah, it'd be fine. But in your head, you're like, oh my God. Oh no.
I looked at the numbers. I looked at our business plan and I said, this is going to work. And my feelings were like, no, it's not. And I'm like, well, I know it is. I'm like, if we don't push through, it's not going to work. Right.
Yeah.
Like,
go all the way.
Up,
like,
you have to go, like, you got to do that 2 to 3 years. Like we have been fortunate and lucky in a lot of ways. We've had some breaks. God has been very fortunate blessing us because we could have been 3 years before turning a profit. That's common for businesses. Some businesses don't start thriving until 5 years. And most, like, again, it's like 50% of businesses fail at 3 to 5 years. It's something like that. I mean, it's just building something is difficult. I was surprised because I'm a planner and I'm a thinker. My wife gets so mad because I don't gain weight, but it's because I literally, if I have something that's going on in our business, I walk the floor in our kitchen for 2 to 3 hours talking to myself, thinking about it, right? That's how I podcasting is just like a way to maybe monetize my constant running mouth. But wow. But what I found was surprising about business is, that helped me. Like thinking through things, anticipating problems, huge. But the skill that I wouldn't say nobody, I heard a lot of advice about starting a business, and I realized I saw a lot of people succeed who didn't think through things, who honestly not the best soft skills like social skills, all these things, but they just believed that they could. They just had the nerves to say, no, I'm worth this much money. Like I had somebody who's been on, like, they were interviewed. She was interviewed in Time Magazine. This kind of stuff. Had her on my podcast. She's absolutely awesome. She's a CEO coach now. And the story of how she got started is ridiculous. She went and interviewed 100 CEOs and wrote it up as research. And this is like, I want to say like the 70s or 80s. I don't know.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And she got picked up by Time Magazine for an interview. Like, this is really interesting.
Yeah.
And someone wrote her and was like, hey, can you coach me on what it means to be a CEO? And she's like, sure. And like, let me get back to you on my rate. She hadn't even like.
Oh,
Called somebody.
yeah.
She called somebody like, "What do they charge?" Like, well, we had a consultant in. They charged us $1,500 a day. So she went back to the person, never done it before, and was like, "Yeah, my rate is $1,500 a day." This is like the '80s, like this is like,
Damn.
oh yeah. And I'm like, she just was like, "Yeah, I'm worth that much money." And then she worked really hard and she backed that up. But she didn't have the experience for that. She did have a little bit of content, interviewing 100 CEOs, so she had some idea. But just like, even when we started with our website, we didn't walk in and say, "Hey, it's going to be $30,000," or like I'm like,
but I'll interject there, right? Because
yeah.
I offer like marketing services, like copywriting, content services, all that. So again, still have this issue sometimes. But the biggest thing that I've learned is that you have to set those prices fairly high for two reasons. One, because you just need to be taken seriously. You need to have set prices. You need to, you can fob off people to an extent. You can be like, "Oh, I need to see the project details," which, I say that because I mean it though. I need to see I need to see what's being asked of me, how much time it's roughly going to take, and then I can quote a reasonable price.
Right.
But secondly, you need to set a high price, because if you set a low price, people either think you're an idiot or they just think like, "Oh, this is clearly bad quality." Because
you attract sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're right. You would attract the wrong sort of people. Like anyone that's willing to work for like peanuts for this kind of work is going to produce something that is not worth anything. Really.
And the people who are looking for the lowest price in their product are people who are only going to be concerned about the price, and they're going to nickel and dime you, and you're actually going to spend. Well, it's funny. We just found that when we were cheaper in price, we found that we had more difficult clients because they wanted to know where all the money was going, and it's like, it's going to my time. That's where. Whereas like now that we're making more money per website, our clients generally are like, "We trust you, whatever you want to do." And it actually takes us less time because we're not fighting with the client. Like we spent more time at lower fees with the client than we did actually doing the work, which is just, and it was over just the dumbest stuff. Like them like, "Well, I've heard that this works better," and it's like, why did you hire me? Why did you hire me? Like.
So they just want to argue with someone. That's what it is. They just want to be like smart asses. And it's like, this is business.
Yes.
Right? If you want to be a smart ass, I don't know, go start a podcast.
Yes.
You be a smart ass in a
podcast. Yeah. Oh
man. Jeez. Do you know what? Like, because a lot of what I do involves collaboration, and I'm fine with that, but I cannot count the amount of times I've spoken to like, because generally who I'm talking to is like SEO manager,
right,
or marketing manager or whatever, right? And it will be like, they're in conversation with the client. Me and the marketing guy don't really need to say much to each other because we kind of know the deal. Maybe we sort of talk specifics, but like, like, "Oh, this is how it needs to be formatted. These are the keywords."
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
But occasionally they'll get a situation. I had one about a year or two ago where the client had either they'd never used marketing services before, or they just didn't know, right? Which is fine. Yes. Look, there's always an opportunity to learn these things. But hey, number one, Google exists. Number two, just saying, you can Google stuff, you can learn, you can find out. Okay, that's what it's there for. It's not the old days where you had to go to the library, or you just didn't know, or you ask, like, I don't know, your uncle who knows, whatever, right? But whatever. But it's number one. Number two, me and this guy, right? We're trained marketing professionals.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're arguing with us. You're saying, "Well, I don't know about this, and I don't know about this." And I said to this SEO guy, like in private, I was like, "Oh," and I was like painstakingly explaining, like, basically I was saying, "Well, I don't know what I can say to this person other than, this is just how it's done, and the way that they understand it is just wrong." Because sometimes things just don't work, and they don't work for a reason. And there's like, and obviously marketing shifts all the time, but there are certain things that, kind of always stay the same, particularly in content management and content production.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like, if you're trying to explain that to someone who doesn't have any knowledge of it, who's arguing with you, it's sometimes you can't say this to the client. That's the thing. Like you said before, when you're talking to clients, you can't voice how you really feel. You just have to be like, yeah, okay. So this is how we should do it, and these are all the reasons why. And then they go, no, we're not going to do that. Okay, well, do you want this to happen? Oh, no. Okay, well, if we do it the way that you want to do it, this is what's going to happen. Oh, no, I don't want that at all. Okay, so shall we do it the way that I said? Yeah? Okay, great. And then that's the conversation you have to have, because it's, and this applies to everything in life, I think. Don't argue with people or talk about things you know nothing about, right?
Yep.
Do your research, find out about it, learn about it. And once you understand what you're talking about, then maybe you can argue a bit, because don't get me wrong, people do screw you around. And, I had a bit of that when I started doing marketing stuff, I had people mess me around a little bit, but I mean, it's like you said, I think it depends on people's priorities. Like if you've got a lot of money as a business and you're looking to hire people and use their marketing services, or marketing agency, whatever, you're basically saying, okay, we either don't have we have the money, but we just don't have the time to invest in having in-house marketing stuff. Or maybe we just don't want it. Maybe it's just more efficient or better to just, or it might even be cheaper to just outsource it, right? Loads of companies do this. I agree. I think it generally speaking should be outsourced. But it depends on what your goals are. It depends on a lot of things. But anyway, you pay for that.
Having an employee for it is expensive.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think at the very least, it's useful to have someone who's like managing it, like a marketing manager or CMO, something like that, right?
Right.
But that's all you really need. If you're going to outsource everything else, you just need someone to like check, okay, yeah, this is fine. Okay, great. But generally there has to be like trust. It's like any relationship, business relationship is the same. You need to trust the agency that you're paying,
Yeah.
It's only when like you're checking stuff and it comes through. Like, and I've seen this. I've worked for companies where, we hired an agent. This was amazing. I remember I worked for a company once, and I started out as a copywriter, and like any job, I ended up doing about 1 million different things. So, by the time I asked for a pay rise and a promotion, it was kind of like they couldn't say no because it was just ridiculous how much I was doing. But that's just how jobs are,
Yeah.
And I wanted to learn, to be fair. It was invaluable, and I still am grateful to that company to this day. But one thing I was not grateful for was continually saying and talking to the SEO manager about this and saying, he'd be like, we should outsource this stuff. And I'm like, I agree. That's a good idea. And then we finally managed to get it outsourced because we'd had some paid writers who were outsourced, but they weren't from an agency. They were just people.
Right.
And they were intelligent people, but terrible at writing. Awful. Dreadful. And so my job initially was to fix their writing. And I realized the scope of this, eventually became like a big project. And I basically fixed an entire part of their website and made my own article format. Like I basically had to create all this stuff from scratch.
Yes.
I didn't realize that initially. It just kind of evolved into that.
Yeah.
But when it came eventually to the point where, we had a bit more money, a bit more control, we're a bit more in the driving seat now, we finally got, a marketing agency to produce articles for us.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know where they were based. I think maybe Australia, somewhere like that. But this was some of the worst writing I have ever seen in my entire life. And I was the guy who had to fix this shit.
Oh, yeah.
So it'd come through and I'd spend loads of time on it. And my manager would be like, hey, Chris, this is taking a while. And I'm like, yeah, but have a look at this. And they'd be like, oh. And I'm like, yeah, I know, right? Why are we still using them? Wouldn't it make more sense to like pay a bit more money, get good quality stuff, and then I just glance it rather than having to fix it? I was like, I might as well just write the shit myself, which is ironic because now I do freelance writing, and I can tell you this, right? You don't need to be an expert in any topic unless you're doing like writing about science, medicine, whatever. Most stuff you can just Google online and learn about it, and then 5 about an hour or two later, you've written several articles on it. It's not hard. It's, you know what I mean? And a lot of the time, here's a secret I'm going to release for everyone. Most people, when they're, or most companies, when they're releasing a new article, the first thing they do, this is a secret, tricks of the trade. They Google the first page, Google SERPs, search engine results pages, look at the first 3 to 5 articles, read them, copy them, but don't plagiarize them, write them in your own words, and publish it.
Yep.
And then the rest is just making sure you have the keywords, maybe spending a bit of money on advertising to push it up. But mostly it's just making sure that you write a better version of what everyone else has already done. Because there's only so many ways you can relay the same information. Unless, number one, very, very important, you can offer something new, an alternative take, some new information, or an offer that no one else is offering.
Yep.
That is the art of content production and management, at least as it exists today.
Or you're a big name.
Well, yeah, but then again, then that's just money, isn't it? You just spend ridiculous money. Like, I remember I worked for a trading company, right? And the SEO manager literally turned around to me and said, look, there are some keywords that we just don't bother ranking for because it's just like, for instance, trying to rank for Forex is just a waste of money. You can do it. You could spend like 50K on that and maybe you'd be on there for like a week, but you've just wasted 50K so that you're at the top of the bloody Google SERPs with that, even though there's a website that is called Forex who's going to rank above you, and no one's going to click on your ad because it's like, why's this here? This doesn't look right.
Well, and that goes back to the podcasting thing you were talking about. Like, if you already have the brand awareness, whether it's a person or a company, like if you start the podcast, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it immediately just jumps up. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if Ryan Reynolds does a podcast, but if he does do if he did a podcast, it would immediately take off because he's Ryan Reynolds. You know what I mean? It's like,
of course,
right.
Yeah, I mean, it took me a while to get my name on the top of the Google SERPs, and I still struggle. My name gets pushed up and down, because the thing is, as well, Google. People forget Google is AI. Google is a computer. It keeps changing things. So even if you've got everything that you're supposed to have in the context of marketing and SEO, you're doing all the best practices, spending the money, doing everything you should do, that doesn't guarantee you're going to be at the top. It just gives you a better chance.
Well, and I've been blessed there because my last name is Wehry, and there's only 250 Wehrys in the United States. So like I have my Gmail is just my name.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, how many people have that? You know, it's like,
that's lucky.
I know. Same thing with like, so when you look me up, it's just my dad, who's Peter Wehry Sr., and then myself. And but that's like, I mean, there's nothing you can do. Like, I'm assuming there's a lot of Reeves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's like what and it's actually funny. So my digital agency is called Candid Goat.
Yes.
So, it's totally a fortuitous thing. I was kind of messing around and did a blog early on, and then that was right around when I started getting sick, and I was actually working 3 part-time jobs at the time. So I was like, okay, first thing to go is the blog. But so I was subcontracting for a digital marketing agency as a coder initially, and then it wasn't working out. They were working like 12-hour days, and I'm like, I have a family. I don't want to work 12-hour days.
Did they say anything to you? Sorry to cut in, but did they offer you anything, or were they just like, all right, bye? Like,
no. They were just starting. They had to work like that. Yeah, and it was, and there were a lot of things where it just didn't work. They're great guys, but just different culture, right? Different views about what they wanted to achieve and what I wanted to achieve, just different expectations. So, I mean, if I saw, I'd sit down and have a drink with them. We just kind of went our separate ways. So, honestly, I work with subcontractors now because I don't want to have like weird HR stuff. I just want, like, if you want to work with me, work with me. If you don't want to work with me, it's fine. Like, we don't have to have hard feelings. We don't have to have lawsuits or something. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to. What are we talking about? So
HR pisses me off, man.
Yeah. So the reason so they asked me to create my own company so I could subcontract for tax purposes.
Oh,
and so I just randomly used I was like, I had to come up with it that day, and I was like, I don't want to do PJ Wehry. That sounds boring. You know what I mean? So I was like, I'll just use my old blog name, Candid Goat. And they're like, that's a weird name. Like, whatever. So when we split ways, I already had this company, and my wife had just lost her job. We were pregnant with our second.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, very exciting.
It's tough. Tough times.
It was very exciting. Yes. Tough times, and grew so much through it. I love it. It's actually been one of the best things that ever happened to me. But
what were the biggest lessons you learned in that? Like the biggest things that you. Well, like, what were the biggest ways you grew?
Let me finish the point about Candid Goat.
Yeah, go.
Yeah. So I didn't think about at the time. One, the name is kind of fun, right? And that's why I picked it for a blog name. But it's worked out. People are like, "Oh, you're like an edgy, cool marketing agency." I'm like, "No, it's just my old blog name." And I'll tell you this: do you know how much competition I have on for SEO for Candid Goat? Zero. You know how many people I've had to fight for social handles? Zero.
You don't understand how lucky you are, man.
I know. I was like, oh, this worked out.
Seriously. Yeah. I've tried to compete with my name, and it's always the person that has my name on Twitter is just some person that never tweets.
Oh yeah, every time. Yeah. So I've just been very fortunate all the way through. Like, so for our podcast, there are some Leviathan type stuff, but chasing Leviathan, I'm already starting to creep up for like no reason at all. You know, it's like, and then the same thing with Wehry Dads. I mean, it's Wehry. You know, I'm like, no one's typing this in unless they're looking for us, you know? So I'm already going to be the top. Like, it's, anyways. So but I love that question you asked. What are the biggest lessons I learned during that time? I mean, that's when I was looking at my wife. So I was teaching. Let me give this whole story. I go and I start teaching, and the school that I'm teaching at, I teach part-time to try and get my foot in the door. It works. They really like me. I'm the last decision that the principal makes before he moves to a different position. And then a new principal comes in to hire me full-time. Ooh. So that's not good. I talked to the new principal, and he says, my main job is to teach an elective that he's like, I kind of want to get rid of that. The new principal. I'm like, well, that doesn't bode well. Ooh. And I also found out I don't like high school teaching is more about lesson plans and about classroom management. And they're both things that I suck at. I don't want to just cover the same material over and over again. I love creating new material. So I'd actually substitute lectured at colleges, and I loved it because the professors would ask me, research this and create a 45-minute presentation on this. And I'd spend hours doing that. And that was awesome, which is what, in college, what you're supposed to do, right? You come up with your own stuff. And that's not what you do in high school. So it was just it's very grinding, and it requires a lot of people interaction. I enjoy talking to people, but I don't get energy from it. I'm like, afterwards, like after this, I'll just be like sitting in my chair like this while my kids run around the backyard,
Same.
Glance at I'll glance at my analytics and see that, I've gotten one view on YouTube in the time that we've talked, right? That's this is what I'll do. But but I had promised them that I would stick it out for at least 3 years. So we started looking for a house. My wife had work. I had work. My wife had just gotten pregnant. And the day we were supposed to go look for a house, I'd gotten a letter saying they were going to rehire me. But that year, the school I was at was in the national news for a racist incident involving some of the students. So it's a private school. They lost 60 students. So so if you look at 60 students, and I think they charge around 15 to 16K a student, that's a lot of teacher salaries. I was 1 year in, I was in an elective, and I didn't have a teaching certification. Oh. I was first off the chopping block. Like, they're like, we like you, you're obviously a good guy, but we're letting you go. And that happened the day we were supposed to go look for a house. Oh, no. So we had already put in for our lease on our apartment, and now I didn't have a job. So we moved back in with my parents, which is always exciting as a father of two. I was probably like 28. I'm like, oh no, I'm the stereotype, like, my parents.
I'm a failure.
Yeah.
No.
At that point, we'd just been trying to make things work.
Yeah.
And I don't care about money enough. I should care about money more. And so what had happened was I was constantly pursuing like philosophy, trying to learn more, and I was just hoping that someone would see the potential in me and just give me a stable job. And that didn't happen. And we moved 8 times in 6 years.
Jeez.
So the 8th time was moving back to my parents. We'd lived with them for like 2 or 3 months when we first moved down and looked for an apartment. That wasn't that big a deal. Now I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And everything that would have fit what I wanted to do was out of state. And I was like, I don't want to move again. I'm like, I'm done. And I don't want to move away from my parents. Like, I want them to be like, my dad's really good at mentoring. My mom is a great nana. You know, it's funny. Like, you're like, I thought they'd be grandma and grandpa, but whatever your kids call them, it ends up becoming, you know, canon. So, but so this happens, and I'm like, I start temping just to like get, and I get offered a job in sales for roofing. And I'm not. I actually got offered a couple different sales jobs. People were like, "Oh, like I tried to get into coding, and I walked in. I was like, I'm gonna do something different. I walked into the place where they did the coding. I'm like, hey, I'd like to do coding, and they kind of like, they're like, you're just getting started. Would you like a sales job though? You seem really good at like just like talking to people. I'm like, I don't want to do sales. Um, and I had to look at my wife and the guy they wanted me to apprentice to a sales guy who was their biggest salesperson at this roofing company, and he made $150,000 a year, but he worked 70 hours a week.
There it is.
Yeah, and he was also like the brother of the CEO, which also like
come on.
Yeah, but I mean, I got to be honest. I mean, I wasn't making anything. I was making like $10 an hour. This was right after Hurricane Irma. My son was born the week before Hurricane Irma, exactly a week before. I don't know if you know anything about Florida. Hurricane Irma did like millions of dollars of damage. Like some people didn't have power for 2 to 3 weeks. It was awful. So they hired me as a temp to go through all the voicemails of people who were angry and calling because they weren't answering back. Ooh. So that was soul sucking. I'm not gonna lie. And so it was literally me like just putting in a database. Hey, this person has called 3 times. They have a hole in their roof the size of a basketball, and they like water's just leaking in. And this like they've called like since like 3 months ago. They were backed up. Like their crews are working because everyone had holes in their roofs, right? Like it was just insane. So they are like, hey, you've gotten through all the voicemails. We think you'd be good. You're really good around the office talking to people. We think you're very similar in personality to this guy. You're not pushy, which is like, I never wanted to be the pushy salesman. The Wolf of Wall Street stuff like makes my like the hair on the back of my neck like, okay, I know. So I'm just like, hey, these are our options. This is what would fit best for you, but you got to make decisions right for you. And that's if I was ever going to do sales, it probably would have been the roofing job, because it's not like selling a luxury car. You know what I mean? That's like, you need a roof. You know what I mean? I always know I'm giving someone something they need. And I looked at my wife and I was like, I'm going to quit this job in 2 years if I take it, because I am not going to drive 70 hours a week and feel fulfilled. I'm going to have a hard time getting up in the morning. I'm not going to see you. I'm not going to see the kids. And I had just started working on coding, and I had done it like for about 3 months when I was a teenager, and then our computer crashed, unrelated, which is hilarious. And my dad was like, "It's because you're coding." I'm like, "No." And I was like, "We need to do this," and it kind of goes back to the slog thing. You know, there's going to be a lot of work involved, and it just takes nerves. It just takes it takes someone who looks at the risk and says, this is worth it. Because the safe thing, and I actually had someone call me up who I respected and was like, sometimes you just need to do the thing you don't want to do to provide for your family. And I was like, thank you. I appreciate that advice. I'm not going to take it. You know, and I was like, I want to do something that I enjoy. I want to do something that when I wake up in the morning, I'm like, but I also chose to compromise in some ways, because I was like, at least I'll enjoy coding, at least, and eventually turned into digital marketing, and I still do some coding, but I'm problem solving and I get to manage my time. And that was just really there. I think too many people I love watching One Piece with my kids. I don't know if you know the anime or the manga. And so the whole point is you have this one young teenager who wants to become king of the pirates, and he's willing to die for that dream. And I want my boys to get that, because I think there are a lot of people in America, at least. I've heard different studies, but 60 to 70% of people don't like their job.
Right.
And I'm looking at that, and I'm like, man, you know, like what do you like? The odds of you actually dying from like pursuing your dream are pretty low. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. But what you are sacrificing, and this is what people like, they complain about their job, but they're not willing to sacrifice their comfort. They're not willing to deal with the stress of, I don't know where the rent's coming from. I might have to, I lived with my parents for 4 to 6 months. Well, I think it ended up being 6 months while I learned to code. And then we went out, and some people were very gracious and helped us. And some of that is just like, you want to build a good support system. It makes me think of, there's a proverb that says, if you want to have friends, show yourself friendly. That's really interesting to me. How many people don't get? It's like, why won't people be friends with me? It's like, because you won't be friends with them. Like, like you have to be the friend that you want to have. And so I had that support system. Very grateful to, like, my parents are not fiscal geniuses. They don't have like tons of money, but they were there for me, right? And that's not something everyone has. So I understand that. But I also took a very clear risk with a wife and 2 kids, saying, I'm going to, literally, I love, messing with my younger brother. He's 9 years younger. And we were sleeping in his room at the time because he was off at college. And my wife's water broke in his bedroom, which I love just bringing up because it really bothers him. It's easy to be embarrassed about like, oh, I literally had a baby at my parents' house because I couldn't afford to take care of my family. And if I got stuck there, then I'd be doing a job I didn't like. And instead of being like, okay, this is where we need to go, I'm not going to be embarrassed. I'm going to focus on what I need to achieve. And this came up. I just talked to my dad about this, and a couple good things came out of this whole thing. One is, I figured out that my parents and I could live together. And so we've been able to create a more financially stable position for my parents and I by living in a, they call it next generation, but multi-generational house. They have their own like in-law suite, that sort of thing. So there was actually good things that came out of it, right? Like that, like, I mean, I wouldn't just jump into that. We had already lived together, and we knew that we could get along. Definitely helps to have a little bit more of our separate space, right? But going back to like, you have to be willing to take risks, and you have to be willing to sacrifice your comfort if you want to, like, if you want to find your purpose. And so what I basically said is, I'm going to create a job, and I'm going to create a company that eventually lets me. I'm sick and tired of like trying to convince people that I'm worth a scholarship that only pays half the tuition anyways. And I'm gonna go back and for PhD they'll often cover your full tuition. And in fact, if they won't, you probably shouldn't get the PhD. It's probably a scam. That's a whole thing. But whether you get a job there or not that actually provides living expenses is very difficult. And what also goes along with that is that it's often like $20,000 a year, which is like nothing to live on. I'm like, you know what? I would love to just be able to say, hey, I'm going to take my time, and I'm going to go out and make money, and then go back and stay. And like, I'm going to find ways to continue to pursue, but an alternative path. And that wasn't going to happen with a 70-hour a week roofing sales position. It's just not going to happen. I'm not going to get, I know myself well enough. I'm not going to get home after a 10 to 12 hour day and crack open Kant and try and grow myself as a philosopher. Like, that's not, it's not going to happen. And so, I've been, the whole process has been really good because instead, like at first, I definitely really struggled with my own mindset. I can't provide for my family. I'm failing. and and why did this happen to me? Why did this, like, you know, I'm looking at like the way that the school set up, what I was promised, what didn't happen, mistakes other people made in regards to me. And I was like, you know, it doesn't help. It doesn't help to stay there. It doesn't hurt. I mean, actually, it's important to work through those things. And I had to work through a lot of crap of like, how did I end up here? And you can't just blame everything on yourself. Like sometimes people do things and you're like, okay, that was unfortunate, right? But if you just stay there and it's like, I can't believe they did that to me, you're never going to move forward. You're never going to move forward. You have to be like, okay, so what am I going to do now? Yeah. And so I think I actually, you know, have this written down. Even from like a political standpoint, I don't know if this would ever work out, but I want to read more. I want to read her stuff because I have a friend who's read a lot of Simone Weil. I don't know if you know that name. But her political philosophy is we have started to create problems by focusing on rights rather than obligations, which is a really interesting concept. And so, and not that, so I'm not saying that people shouldn't have rights. I'm like, I don't want but the way that, like, if instead of telling people what they are owed, what they owe, and giving, like, making sure people focus on their responsibility. And everyone who's listening to this, and I'm sure you've experienced this, there's nothing worse than a room full of people who are arguing about whose responsibility it is to take a project. And instead of just being like, I don't care. I don't care whose responsibility it is. It just needs to get done. Right? And that's your life. Like, it's your life. You got to take responsibility for it. And there's a lot of people, and that's not a question about government or any of that stuff. I want to make sure people are fed. We went on certain forms of unemployment and welfare for a little bit, so I'm not sitting here like, oh, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I understand it's hard. I'm glad that stuff is there, but eventually, like, if you just stay on welfare, you're going to forget about the governmental drain or the politics of it. You're going to be unhappy because you have to find something that you do that gives you purpose. You have to have a reason to wake up in the morning. And, you know, just saying, hey, I'm just going to watch the latest Netflix show is not going to cut it in the long run.
Yeah.
And so, and that, you have to have that support network. I'm not a huge fan. A lot of times when people talk about bootstrapping, they're like, well, if you just work 80-hour weeks and you just, like, you know, you never see your family. I'm not saying that, but you have to, try and create some kind of support network. And I know some people have that, some people don't, but at the end of the day, you have to be a support for someone else in order to create that. And some of that's noticing when some people are just taking advantage of you as well. But really just recognizing, like, it really is all about mindset. That guy who runs a charter plane business was homeless for 6 months, lived out of his car. And he has the same story as me. He said, eventually one day I was like, okay, like, I had some bad stuff happen to me. Really, like, from what I understand, I haven't gotten the entirety of the story, but, like, I was like, oh, like somebody really was just cruel to him. Someone, like, intentionally sabotaged his life. He said, at the end of the day, who cares? Like, everybody has problems. You have to just be like, I'm gonna go and change and make it better. It doesn't fix. I think what I'm trying to say is it doesn't help to dwell on it.
You can't live your life as a victim.
You
basically.
can't. You cannot. And so if you do that, you're just going to end up living. And that's why it kind of goes back to that One Piece idea. And what I want my kids to understand is a life without purpose is dead already. And I think that's, like, as much as it's pirates and they basically have superpowers and stuff like that, like, really the main lesson I want them to learn is, like, you have to have purpose in your life, or otherwise, like, if you're just wasting time, why? Like, what's the point? That, like, those people are so unhappy. They go to their job, and they, like, if your job is making you unhappy, and this is what we're seeing with, like, I don't know if you've seen, like, the Great Resignation, like, so people are quitting after the pandemic in record numbers.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden they're like, I didn't like my job. And it's really like, I was happier at home.
Imagine
and they're
that.
not. Yeah, I know. And it's like, wait a second. I like what I'm doing. I would rather risk the instability and go find something that makes me happy And I hate that. That gives me purpose. I firmly believe that happiness is a secondary goal. And by that I mean, like, there's a lot of things in life that people will pursue that end up not paying you back anything. And I think happiness is one of those. I think if you pursue happiness, you will not find it. But if you pursue purpose, you will find happiness. So, and I don't know if,
I want to probe you a little bit. Why do you think that pursuing happiness is not a positive thing? Why does it lead to failure?
Because it starts becoming, it goes back to the obligations and rights thing. It becomes about you. It becomes about your happiness. And I think that's actually short-circuiting. And some of this is kind of anecdotal, but I think the logic of it, of like, you can't find everything you need inside yourself. I don't think that. I think, if you're living completely for yourself, and everyone kind of understands this, right? I think an Epicurean idea of happiness, you could, like, the Epicureans had like this idea of like putting out and creating a stable, purposeful life, and that leads to happiness. But a lot of people, when they talk about seeking their own happiness, they're like, a good example, and I'm just, this is I said I didn't want to do controversial takes, but I know. I don't think, like, a lot of people talk about marriage, and the point of marriage is to be happy. And then what we're seeing is a lot of people not getting married because they're like, that doesn't make you happy. Yep. And a lot of people getting divorced because it's like, it's not making me happy. And I'm like, that's because you don't understand what marriage is for. Marriage is about building something together.
Yeah.
That's what marriage is for. Like, I'm building something with my wife. Have I always been happy with her? No. That's so obvious. Like, have you always had great moments with all your friends? No. It's like, I use marriage as like that ultimate connection, right? But like, if you dump your friends at the first time they make you unhappy or seriously unhappy, you're going to end up not having friends.
It's all about the way that these things play out, though. Like, I totally agree with you, but I think there's got to be levels to this stuff. Like, if your buddy or your partner betrays you in a way that's like just unforgivable, all right, fair enough. But if it's like like, I do kind of believe in second chances, but it's a tricky thing. It is. For instance, if someone lies to you, I hate lying. Liars. I understand as well that sometimes people lie for good reason, or just because they're scared.
Yeah.
And you have to look at the character of a person overall, and you have to look at their intentions and who they are rather than their actions, because good people do bad things sometimes. Sometimes life forces us to do things that maybe are not in line with our character, and I think for those reasons, and everyone deserves a second chance, everyone deserves forgiveness. I do kind of believe in these concepts. And hey, I'm not even a religious guy. I know that you're a religious man. I'm not a religious man, but I do kind of believe in these principles, mostly because our society is built upon them. People forget this. Things like law and order and everything, it's all built on religion and the principles, at least. Whether or not they're enacted.
That's not where I thought you were going, but I mean, I agree with that too, but yeah.
Well, whether or not they're enacted and followed and everything is another story, but that's at least what the idea is. And I go back and forth on this because I'm very old-fashioned when it comes to these things. Like, I've had some bad experiences over the years, and I do that makes me very hesitant, cautious. But at the same time, I do kind of give people second chances here and there, because I try to go live my life with that idea of, okay, well, what would I want if I was in their shoes? If I was the one in the wrong, what how would I want to be treated? And I try to focus on that. But there are some things that are just, you got to draw the line on, and you got to be like, that's not acceptable. That's not okay. It's just knowing what those things are. That's the tricky thing.
Well, and this is so, and that's why I say we should pursue purpose rather than happiness, because purpose gives you better guidelines on how to deal with toxic people. So then like, is this making me happy? Is this not making me happy? And that's part of the reason is the banality of the way happiness is portrayed in our society, right? Like, it gets it. For me, a lot of times the word exists in a certain family right? And it exists in a certain vision. And purpose tends to be more long-term focused. So you mentioned, people. So let me be clear. Like, obviously, if there's like serious abuse going on in a marriage, like obviously, like that, get out of there, take the kids. Like, this is, and I even say serious abuse because some people will like literally be like, oh, they called me a piece of shit, I can't believe it. It's like, okay, it's like
Shit.
like, like I'm talking about like, if it's dangerous, you need to get out, right? Like, but the other side of this, and I think this is really important, and my parents kind of come from a counseling background, and I did a little bit of that work kind of underneath them at my dad worked at a college, and he was the dean of students, and he would work with troubled students, and then I worked kind of in that department. So you can imagine our family discussions are kind of hilarious, and everyone's like, well, yes, but talk that through. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah. But we're also like, my dad and I are New Englanders, so there's also like, no, that's stupid. Like it's a weird mix. I'm not gonna lie. So one of the things my dad says, and I think this is really useful here, and this kind of goes back to the obligations versus rights and just how you live your life. So I don't know if it would work politically, but from a moral standpoint, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
That's a foundational, and I've been stunned. It's such a simple statement, but it's unbelievable how if I play that sentence in my head, it really helps with a lot of difficult situations. And you start to look for the hurt in the other person. And so, like, do I have that? Will this detract from my purpose to help this person? Or is this something that, like, because for me, I have this full-bodied vision of where I want to go. And I know that, like, some of that includes like a strong community around me. Does that make sense? And so if this person's going to like destroy my community, I'm not going to give them a second chance, right?
Yeah.
But if I can bring them into the community, and that's where the hurt people comes in. The only way you stop that, right? Because if someone hurts me, then I hurt someone else, and I'm like, well, it's because they hurt me. And it's like, eventually someone has to say, it's okay that you hurt me. There has to be grace. There has to be a moment where someone looks and says, hey, it's okay. Let's work through this together. And when you do that, you can do incredible things for people. You can see people who their entire life, and those people become incredible friends because they understand what you did for them when you looked at them and said, I understand that you were hurt. Let's work through that. And I understand you hurt me. Let's work through that and like move towards this purpose. If that makes sense. And
yeah, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, and then because that moment is not a moment of happiness normally. So whether you're religious or not, one of the most powerful passages in the Bible, and you can just accept it as a metaphor, right? It just works as a lesson, is Ezekiel in the Valley of Dry Bones. And people don't understand, I don't know if you're familiar with it. Basically, this prophet has a vision from God, which is why it works as a metaphor, right? Like it wasn't real even in the Bible. He goes in and he sees a valley full of dry bones, and people are like, "That's you ever heard the song them bones, them dry bones?" That's where it like, that's where it comes from. So honestly, most people think of the song and it's kind of a happy thing. Like, no. Like when you like look at it, it is the long dead trauma of it's a mass grave. Like that's what it's a valley full of dry bones. Like think about what that means. Someone killed a bunch of people and just left them to rot. And it's been decades since then. You're like, kind of changes the, and what God is saying to Ezekiel is, he's speaking to Israel and he's saying, I know that you just lost your whole nation, but I am the Lord and I'm going to resurrect you. Because what happens to the dry bones is God resurrects them into fully alive people again. And I've found that to be a powerful message, whether you're a Christian or not, because it's the whole principle of resurrection is you take something that's long dead and you give it life. And I've heard a lot of people, and this is why I'm not a big fan of like, I understand positive thinking, and there's a lot, obviously I've talked about it in some ways already, but positive thinking without first going through the trauma and the difficulty, and that's not a happy place. And I think that's where I'm going with it is like, happiness is on the other side. So if you're constantly evaluating by happiness, you're not going to, like, you have to see the happiness that's on the other side, if that makes sense. And really, it's not something like, at least for me personally, I don't look at like going through and working with someone who's been hurt and say, and that's just everyone. Anyone you get close to has hurt. Everyone you work with has short circuits in their thinking related to something, like signals they received in the past that weren't actually related to why someone hurt them. And so you look at that. I don't look at that and like, well, I'll be happy in a year from now. You know, like, like that's not going to get me out of bed in the morning. But I'm like, I'm building something. I'm building something with this person, and I'm building my life with them. And I mean, for me, I tend to have not a quite as individual of a view of identity as Westerners tend to. I think there's, you know, my background's in hermeneutics. That's what I focused on, science and art of interpretation for my master's. So there's this whole idea of the hermeneutical circle where you have the whole and the part and you go back and forth. And I think the West has like strayed like to focusing too much on parts and not on the whole. And that's kind of plays in this whole discussion too. It's like your identity is very much wrapped up in who's around you. And yeah, you can't, you know, a lot of times I like to think of people like, well, there's this person and you have like this very tight identity wrapped around this person. It's like, well, we run into this all the time. I mean, climate change is a good example. It's like someone else is doing something and it affects me directly and it changes my life drastically. So we have to address this at a communal level, because you're like, if you just address it at the individual level, it's not gonna solve a systemic problem. So that, but it also, you can't just address it as a systemic problem. You also have to address it as an individual problem. They both work together. So for me, like a fundamental model, instead of thinking in terms of, there's literally a political philosophy called realpolitik, where you think of things like billiards. Like you have the different balls just bouncing off each other. And I think it's more like we are roots and branches on a tree, right? Where you can look at us as you know, like, okay, that's a branch, that's a part of the tree, but we're also like all connected, right? Like if grocery stores failed tomorrow, I would be in real trouble because I don't know how to get my food. You know what I mean? And so like understanding how that all works together is very important for understanding my point here, that like the cost of having people around you who are hurting and not dealing with that, or just cutting them off. If you cut off people who are hurting, you're going to cut off everybody, because everybody's been hurt. And so eventually you're going to have to work through this. And sometimes you won't have the energy to work through it and you will have to cut somebody off. Or someone is literally just a taker all the time. So I'm not talking about those people, right? Like if someone, that's where trajectory is actually really important. Are they trying to grow or are they stagnating? And even if they're at a high level, but they're starting to decline and they don't care, that's really scary, right? Like you're going to take me down with you. But just understanding that we have to go through pain to find what I would call joy, and that's that long-term happiness. And thinking in terms of joy, I don't think gives us the ability to get through the slog. You know, we taking it all the way back to our the podcasting thing. I have to have a purpose for what I am building, and for me, that's a thick description, not a thin description. So it's just like, my purpose is to be a good person. Is very weak. It's like, what does a good person look like? So you have to have a vision of like all the different, like a thick description of like, what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to live a good life? You know, you're like, I just want to live the good life. And it's like, well, if that changes every day, you're just going to be like, like what are those things at car sales things? You ever see those like balloons that are like,
why can't you inflate them? I'm inflating too, man.
Yes, exactly. So I don't know if that all makes sense, but
yeah, no, I get where you're coming from.
Really, and I that's what got me through tough times. I was like, I'm going to build something, right? Like when I talk about my wife pregnant with a second kid, I'd have no job, and there was an easy way out, but it wasn't the life that I wanted to live. And so, and yeah, like, well, now you're happier. Yes, I am happier, but it wasn't because I was worried. Like, there was a lot of pain involved. Like, going $50,000 in debt and not knowing your next rent payment is coming from. Like, I mean, and we didn't always do it right. Like, I'm not a financial wizard, so like sometimes we were using 0% credit cards and we're transferring, and like it's like it was a mess. And then when I went into business, trying to build good relationships over money, like literally giving people money back or giving them free work, either way, whatever it took to make sure that I was doing what I was obligated to do. You know what I mean? Like if I mess up, I need to make that right. I'm not just going to take the money and run. And I'm going to make sure that the other person is taken care of, and creating long-term stable patterns around me, because that's the secret to success. Not like, hey, and you know, if this, so a great example of this is the GameStop stock, right? A lot of people made a lot of money very quickly, and that's great. But the people who made a lot of money very quickly, who didn't have, who had stable patterns of success already, took that money and turned it into something better.
There you go.
Because eventually life will give it. And I guarantee you, there are a lot of people who made a lot of money, but who just happened upon it by luck. And this is like, and then they just, it's just gone. Right? They've done nothing with it. I mean, that's literally the story of lotteries. I don't know if you know the statistics for lottery winners, but it's horrible. Most of them live terrible lives. Did you know that?
Yeah, I've heard about this. I've read about this. And I think the reason for that, ironically, which brings this all full circle, is a lack of purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't know what, because here's the thing, like I've had countless conversations with people, both friends, my live stream audience. Unfortunately, I'm not in the greatest financial position right now. And there's a lot of things I would love to do project-wise.
Yeah.
That if soon as I had the money, I would do it like that, you know.
Right.
We're talking different types of content, different things in life, you know, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. I just want you to know that we're doing well, but we still haven't paid off all our debt. Like, we're 3 years in business, so
well, these things take time. They take time. They take time, but it's like to the point. I mean, if you're a person with goals, with prospects that you wish to achieve, goals you wish to achieve, projects you want to invest time and money into, having a lot of money is no problem. Like, it's going to just help you achieve those things, and you know, you're going to be okay. Might not always be easy, but like, you know, you'll be okay. But yeah, people that win the lottery, it's always people that like don't know what to do with the money. Now, I remember there was this one couple in the UK, 50 years old, right? They win 160 million, something stupid like that. Yeah. And they get interviewed. They choose, because you get an option. You can either choose to be anonymous, or, which I would definitely do, like screw people about that. But yeah, they were just like, oh yeah, let's be on camera, great. So I bet they're living a fun life, like with trying to bat off all their friends. Right. But anyway, that's another story. But yeah, they got interviewed, and the guy said,
sorry, I hate to interrupt you, but I got to add this fact. I think I want to get the number right, but I believe it was, you are 20 times more likely to be murdered if you win the lottery.
Oh my god! Yeah. Oh my god! Yeah.
No, exactly. When you talk about those friends, and
that's not funny, but it's just so absurd.
It is funny. It is funny. Like, let's just be honest. It's like, and most of the time, it's your family.
Jesus.
Like, yeah. Anyways, so yes. Oh, stable communities.
There's a reason. There's a reason to keep your mouth shut and not go on about how much money you do or do not have. There's a reason right there, folks. Crikey. But yeah, this story. So they're being interviewed, and the interviewer asks them, 160 million. That's a lot of money. What are you going to spend that money on? And the husband just goes, oh, I don't know. Probably put it in the bank. And I'm just sitting there like, what do you mean? Put it in the bank. 160 million. And you, oh my God. What? It's just wasted on you.
Still better than what most people do with the lottery.
Well, yeah, but come on.
Oh no, I know. No. Like, that's like, But here's the truth. This is the truth about the lottery. If you're good enough with finances to handle the lottery, you're good enough with finances not to play the lottery, because at the end of the day, like, it's not a good investment.
Well, there's some people that call the lottery the idiot tax, don't they?
Yes, I've always heard it's a tax on people who are bad at math. That's a.
Well, it's the sort of it's the problem is, right?
Yeah.
You play the lottery every week, or ideally, if you're going to do it, that's what you should do, right? Because obviously,
right.
You never know when your numbers will come up. But it's always the sort of thing of that 1 week where you don't play the lottery. That's probably where your numbers are going to come up. And that's the reality. And it's happened to so many people. So many people.
Yes. I think it's very much playing the lottery, and not trying to anger people, but playing the lottery is still, you're putting your agency in someone else's hands. Maybe that's another way of talking about what we're talking about. Like, take life in your own hands, save that money, or just spend it on yourself. Like, your odds of winning are so low. Like, I would rather have the momentary happiness of adding an extra pump of caramel or whatever in whatever drink I'm getting at the coffee house. Like, yeah. It's like, it's still going to be a better investment. Something to, because I kind of like this lottery discussion. And this was from 10 or 20 years ago, so I'm sure it's changed in the United States. And I know it's going to be different in the UK, right? But they did a study on how money correlates to happiness. And what they found was that it does make people happier. The more money you have, well, this is interesting. This is very important. More money equated to people responding they were happier, up to $75,000. That was about 10, 20 years ago. $75,000 a year. After that, there was no correlation. And that makes sense. Like, we made
suit of money probably is more.
Well, more. I think once you know, like, you're not in a position where you're like, how am I going to pay my rent? I'm in debt. How am I going to pay it off? Like, that stress is going to obviously impinge on your happiness, right? Like, I've been there. Like, I was very stressed and very unhappy. It sucked, right? I know, like, but and it's interesting because when I was teaching, I gave the stat to my kids, and one of the kids said, "Oh, like, no way! That can't be right, because my dad makes way more than that, and there's no way we could live on that much. So that must be for, like, specific demographic, whatever." And I was like, okay, like, I wasn't gonna like fight with him about it, like tell him his family's making way too much money or whatever. Obviously, private school, they're making good money. And then I was like, I walked out afterwards because I just wasn't prepared for that objection. And I was like, he has a brand new F-150 truck that's like $60,000-$70,000, and I'm like, and he's 16. He's like, we wouldn't even be able to feed our family on $75,000. I'm like,
but see, you're right there.
You don't need that brand new truck.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing.
Yeah.
It's likely, obviously his family's rich, right?
Yeah. Yes.
But the likelihood is that his parents were not, like, born rich. Like, they had to work normally like everyone else, and then they got to that point, right?
Yeah.
But right there is the problem, because they've not taught their kid the value of money.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. Like, for instance, with me, I mean, look, I've lived my whole life poor, but I know one day that's going to change. I just know it. I feel it. I know that things are going to change, and I'm going to be rich. But what I know is very important is to not lose sight of the worth and value of money and the worth and value of things. Just because you've got X amount of money in the bank doesn't mean you should spend it, like, in a silly manner. Do you know what I mean? And that's the reality. You need to be able to teach your kids that. You need to say, do you know what? Yes, we can afford these things, but this is a better way to do things. Like, you need to make, they always say, rich people always say, you need to make your money work for you. You need to, if you're making money, if you're rich, you need to invest your money so that it's doubling or tripling or whatever, so that you're always building.
Yeah. So I don't think there's I don't know what the magic number is in the UK of where someone lives comfortably, and I'm sure $75,000 in California is different from $75,000 in Florida. But
so, again, it's the same in the UK. It depends where you're living, type of life you're living. It's a tough one.
But I think there's a principle here, and the principle is once you get rid of the stresses in your life and you can live comfortably, and by that I mean you're not having to, like, if you use your money wisely, then you don't have as many fears, right?
Yeah.
You don't have as many stresses, you don't have uncertainty. Then after that, like, and some of that is knowing the worth of money, right? But like, if someone's making $150,000 a year, or someone's making hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and you ask their kids, and one family eats dinner together every night, and they hang out with their dad takes off like once a month, he takes them out for like to go fishing, or I don't fish. I don't know why I use that as an example, but like, I mean, he does something with them versus the family with several hundred million, and they, every time they walk down the stairs, the mom and dad are screaming at them. Like, who's going to be happier? Like, and that's really, like, at the end of the day, like, money is for people. And I grew up at the federal poverty line. So So at one point in our life, and we were living in a cheaper area, so I don't think it was that bad. And I was never at the point where I had to worry about where my next meal was coming from. But what that next meal was could often be like, like spaghetti and meatballs again. All right, it's like
I've been there.
Yeah. And that's fine. Like, and that was when I was a kid, right?
Yeah.
So so I understand a little bit, not as much. Like I know there are people who go without meals, and that's a different sort of thing.
Yeah, there are different levels to it. Like, yes. I remember growing up at school, and I was a poor kid, but like I remember going to other kids' houses who were poorer than me, and I was like, maybe I ain't got it so bad.
Exactly.
Like,
maybe that's important. Keep that.
Yeah.
But like looking at just when you look at your life and realize, yes, money brings money brings stressors too, like managing it. But I'd rather have. Reminds me of Fiddler on the Roof, where he's like, "If money is a curse, may God strike me with it." It's like, like may I never recover from the curse. Yeah. But money, like the lack of money, brings a certain amount of stressors. But there's so many other ways that you can have unhappiness in your life than the lack of money, and that's, I think, the really. And that's what I think people miss. And that's why I think is another way of looking at just kind of what I've been mentioning this whole podcast, which is, you have to find something that fits all the parts of your life together. Because if you're just pursuing riches, eventually, money's another good example. I did not focus on making money at the start of our business, which is an odd thing to say. I focused on creating a reputation.
Well, I think that's equal, if not more valuable these days.
Right.
Online reviews are like so valuable. That can make or break your business.
Yes, and in the business we're in, people don't look at Google reviews. We work with keynote speakers, for them it's word of mouth, and it's like, I mean, you want to be good with people, and I saw this from my dad. My dad never worked a job where he made a lot of money, but he was always at least taken care of because he always took care of other people. And so, I mean, and for me, this is like creating genuine friendship. And I am blessed to have several men that I call my close friends. That's a big contributor to happiness.
Sure.
But a lot of that just comes from, it's not about, people laugh about people fighting over the bill, who's going to pay. It's not actually about who's going to pay. It's about clearly demonstrating to the other person that who pays is not what's important, right? It's about saying, I'm not here because you're paying for my meal, right? And I don't care who pays for the meal, but if it comes down to it, I'm going to pay for the meal. And I'm always going to push to pay for the meal because I want to demonstrate to the other person that I am here for them, not because I'm like, ooh, I got a $10 Applebee's meal and a drink.
I get what you mean. No, there's like I recently saw a best friend of mine who I hadn't seen in 5 years.
Yeah.
And when I say I'm broke, I mean it's it's tricky times, tricky dicky.
Oh yeah.
But we went out, and I made sure to keep the money low, but at the same time, you know, look, I haven't seen this guy in 5 years. I'm going to spend money on this guy. I don't care.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the first place we went, it was like a really cool arcade bar place, and it's really good vibes. I just wanted to say like, hey, here's a place that I really like. I want to show you this. You'll have fun here. We had fun together.
Awesome.
I remember it came to where we were going to buy drinks for each other, and I was like, I got this, and he's already in there. He's got his card out. He's trying to. We're like fighting a little bit, and then I just push him aside, and I'm like, "Listen, I'm buying you this drink. I want to buy you this drink.
Yeah,
this is important." And I can't remember my exact wording, but basically what I was trying to say is like, I haven't seen you in 5 years.
Yeah,
and I want to buy you this drink because I respect you and you're my friend. And it's like, and like you say, it's not about paying. It's more about like the acts or something.
The demonstration.
It's like, nah, I respect you. Let me do this for you, kind of thing.
So I'm gonna always bring it back to hermeneutics in my head, because like interpretation is I love it. I love literature. I love art, and just like how you like dig through things. But it's funny how like this has been a huge help for me in relationships, and whether someone's toxic or not toxic, whether someone's ignorant or whatever, there's a couple different things. When you read a book, and again, possibly stepping on people's toes here, there are different ways to read it.
People that don't read books.
No. Like, some people think you can read whatever you want into a book, and I don't believe that. I think you can have different readings of books, but it's going to fit within a range, right? You can't just
interpretations
like
of
interpretations. Right. Different interpretations. And what's important is like you can read certain passages different ways, but there are always, if you're reading a book, there are always certain keystone moments that an author says, this is what's important, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like Lord of the Flies is not a happy story. If you read it as a happy story, you're a little weird. I don't know if you've read the book. It's about children going feral and killing each other. So,
that's right. Yeah.
And
that was on the syllabus at my school. I mean, we never studied it, but like I think certain classes did. Like, what the?
Yeah. So, anyway. But whatever. Yeah. So whatever you do, I think those kind of moments have been especially important to me, because I noticed there are key moments in every relationship where you can read someone's reaction. Like someone might laugh at a joke or might not laugh at a joke, and you're like, maybe they just didn't think it was funny. Maybe they don't like me. You know what I mean? Like there's all sorts of like different ways you could and I overthink things, right?
That's
become a parent, and you're just sitting there and you're like, oh. But there are key moments where someone does something like, the only reason that person would do that is because they like me.
I thought you were going to say the only reaon they would do that is because they're an asshole.
That happens too. Yeah. That happens too. And then they become my friends. But the
exactly.
Yeah. But so
I respect this asshole.
Yeah, exactly. No, and so I've learned to do that for myself, is like there are key points where I'm like, I have a chance here to demonstrate that I clearly care about this person. This isn't something that like it in business, most of the time people are like, oh, they're just doing it for customer support.
Right.
But so this has come up a couple times where people have had family emergencies that we work with, other subcontractors, and we have Uber Eats them food.
Yeah.
I don't have to do that. That's not in the customer success package where, make your coworker happy package, right? That's like, I care about you. And I listen to them when they talk about their personal problems, because that's me. And that doesn't always mean I have to solve them, right? I'm not saying like, I don't have energy to solve everyone's problems. Let me be clear, right? So sometimes all you need to do is listen. Sometimes you're like, hey, here's a small thing I can do. I do care. And that's so important for building those kind of long-term stable things that do like lead to happiness, right? And I'll say joy instead of happiness. Like they can be interchangeable. I'm just talking about like, I think of my cousin went to West Point, and then he was in the military, and his friends consistently talked about how broke they were.
Right.
And you can actually like, you don't have a lot of expenses in the military. I don't know if you know that, right? It's like they feed you and you don't have to pay for rent, right? But every weekend they went and blew several $100s at the local bar.
Oh,
and then they would complain about why they were broke. And it's and so when you look at this, and he's like, and they're like, man, you always have so much money. It's like, that's because I'm not. But that what they were pursuing is like, oh, I want to be happy. And that's the kind of, you know what I mean? I want to be happy right now. I want something, give me something for the gram, you know? And like, and it's really dangerous to social media, because you look at Instagram and someone's like, wow, they're having such a good time. And it's like, yeah, until they wake up in the morning and they have no bank account, and then they're like, oh, I have no money. You know, it's like, so I think that's kind of, but a lot of people live that way. And so I think that's kind of what I'm talking about as well.
Wow, what a roller coaster that was.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I could get really serious on all that stuff, but yeah.
I mean, this is what it's about. I was sitting there thinking about a lot of things, and I was thinking, like, this is why I do podcasting. I think I like to hear people's stories and their ways of life, and it's funny. Like, we're in completely different parts of the world, yet I can relate to you on a lot of things, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That just kind of blows my mind sometimes, just thinking about that.
It's a phenomenal thing. I love that. My favorite part about podcasting, and not to diss Central Florida, because I do enjoy living here, but you do get a very certain crowd here. Philosophy, a master's in philosophy does not give you a great avenue to talking to people in Central Florida generally. Like, I'm in like rural Central Florida. It's like, it's not like a philosophy hotspot. And for me, it's not about the philosophy per se. It's exactly what you're talking about. It's about me connecting with people who are different, who challenge me, help me to grow.
Sure.
And recognizing how we are similar, learning from our differences. And I think it's a phenomenal thing. That's why I'm doing this. It's why you're doing this. It's really awesome. So thank you so much for having me on.
It's a pleasure having you. What's the biggest life lesson that you've learned so far?
I struggle, and I know this is surprising.
Everyone.
Linking lessons together. Well, no, I was gonna say I link all the lessons together, right? And I'm like, and one way you can look at it like this, or another way, and like, you know, this is me talking to myself at, 11 at night, pacing back and forth in the kitchen, driving my wife crazy. But I think what has worked for me, and I'll make it very personal, because everyone's life lesson needs to be different. They come from different backgrounds. I have always been rewarded when I pursue the truth. And it always takes courage, and it often hurts, because when you truly pursue the truth, you are opening yourself up to change, and that hurts. But it's always been worth it. It's always been worth it to be like, to listen when someone gives me feedback and be like, oh, I am an asshole, right? Like, I'm like, oh no. And like, that hurts, right? When I've been challenged in my faith, and like, I grew up, so, I mean, we didn't get into this, but I grew up independent, fundamental Baptist, like weird stuff, right? Like, like theologically wise, where it's like, women shouldn't wear pants, and like, rock and roll music kills plants, and God is a giver of life, so therefore rock and roll music is evil. Real thing I heard multiple times. Yeah, it's now I love, like Led Zeppelin. A friend of mine gave me Led Zeppelin. It was like a revelation. I was like, I mean, it might kill plants, but it's given me life. I don't know, like, so I had to go through a lot of change, and I pursued truth. And there were things in my past that I had to reject, but I also, like, I didn't have to. There were some things in my past that I accepted because they helped, right? Like, I was pursuing, like, they are true. And so not just reacting one way or the other, but like actually not focusing on where, who's right or who's wrong, but focusing on what's right and what's wrong, focusing on the truth. And it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to just be like, okay, what actually matters here and what's actually true? And it's a real, it's a test of courage, because of the pain it can inflict on you, but you're always a better person on the other side of it.
Brilliant. Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. Thanks for sharing. As we draw things to a close for today, do you have any upcoming projects or maybe some final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I have the two podcasts, Weary Dad's Chasing Leviathan. We became busier than we'd ever been in our business, and so we had too much work, and then when we had to start training people to take on that work at the same time, so it got put on hold. But I'm halfway through a novel, so I'm kind of excited about that. But
cool. What's that one?
It's an urban fantasy. It's about an elf who's magically disabled, who's a private investigator. So
interesting. Okay.
I read enough fantasy novels where like, oh, they're the chosen one and they have secret powers that get revealed. And spoiler alert, I didn't do that. Like, it's like, oh, he's magically disabled, but at the end he has like this secret power that helps him win the day. I'm like, that's kind of boring. I've heard it enough, and honestly, it doesn't tell me anything about the character. It's just like, it's kind of wish fulfillment where people are like, oh, like maybe I have a secret power that'll save me someday, and a lot of times, which
so
is always bad.
You're just being painfully realistic with this novel.
I've gotten a lot better, obviously, like out of the times when I struggled with depression and anxiety, I gave that to this character. So he's like, he's constantly getting hurt, he's constantly failing, and he just keeps pushing through. And I thought that would be I love the idea of the bum investigator instead of the super sharp, like 007, like, oh, I'm going to come in and fix everything because I'm so suave. But the guy who like, even like Dirty Harry, the guy who's like, oh, I'm a badass. Like, this guy's not a badass, and he's constantly making mistakes. To me, that's a fun new take and kind of fresh. So that's kind of where I'm going with it. But we'll see. We'll see when I finish that. Trying to get things in order in my own house first. But just the podcasts and trying to guest on other people's podcasts because I love this. I love doing this. I love hanging out and talking with people who believe. What I love about the podcasting community is that it believes in dialogue. That's literally the whole point of the medium. And even you said it. You're like, I see people with content. Actually, I don't want to drag the other person. They probably have great content at 20 to 30 minutes. But like when you look at like TikTok and people becoming famous for like just following trends and just dancing and stuff like that, and you're like, I'm actually digging into stuff, right? Like, there's a set of values that are embedded in this medium that are the reason I'm here, and that's because I love talking at length with people and I love dialoguing, and I know that's why you're here too. And so that's encouraging to me.
Awesome, man. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Just want to say a massive thank you. And to everyone listening to the Christian Reeve podcast, thank you for listening. As always, be safe, be well, and I will see you in the next one.